Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. It's your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. There is little doubt that last week was a disappointment. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. I titled this episode, Voters Get the Government They Deserve, because it explained everything that we witnessed. You know, the November elections are over. Democrats swept across the board from New York City's mayoral race to the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia to the attorney general's race in Virginia, where Jay Jones somehow managed to pull off a win. Probably the biggest surprise to me of the night. And as far as the other races go, none of these results are that shocking. These are blue states, deep blue cities. And Democrats are celebrating. I know that they're celebrating. Mamdani's win was something that certainly was impressive. And Republicans need to do some serious soul searching here. Because while there were some hard-fought battles, there were also races where the GOP simply surrendered before it even began. And there are a lot of warning signs for Republicans. But at the same time, Democrats shouldn't get too confident. They shouldn't get too cocky or arrogant because there are a number of warning signs for them as well. And I want to start with the race that was the most embarrassing of them all. And it's right in my backyard, New York City. Everyone knew New York City was a long shot, but Republicans didn't even try. They didn't even put up a fight. Sliwa may have put up a fight, but not the Republican Party. And the state party, they didn't lift a finger to field any type of candidates, build momentum, reach new voters. You have Curtis Sliwa. Now, he may not have been the best choice. Apparently, the leadership in the Republican Party didn't want him. They didn't like him. They didn't rally behind him. Not for nothing. If they didn't like Sliwa, why didn't they field another candidate and hold a primary? Maybe it could have generated some enthusiasm. Maybe they would have found someone who better resonates with voters. But instead, they didn't do a damn thing to challenge the New York City election. They were silent. They didn't lift a finger to help him. And worse, just 2 weeks before the election, you had prominent Republicans who were telling their own supporters to vote for Andrew Cuomo, Emperor Cuomo, over Sliwa. Even Trump did that. They told Republicans to back the same Cuomo who weaponized the pandemic, drove people out of the state, told conservatives that they should leave the state, push bail reform, close prisons, released felons, had a legacy of corruption. Why should Republicans support that? Because of the idea of the lesser two evils? Some of the party bosses, they think they're so smart. The truth is they have no strategy to make inroads in New York City. Instead, they routinely show what cowards they really are. And if you're a Republican leader in New York who's decided that the fight for New York City isn't worth it because Republicans are grossly outnumbered, then step aside. You shouldn't be in the leadership position. You have no business being in leadership. You represent everything what's wrong with politics today. The obvious truth is that you can't rebuild the Republican brand or win over new voters if you don't show up, and that's exactly what Republicans did. You don't change the narrative by giving up. It was surrender disguised as strategy. And be honest, Mamdani's win, it was impressive. You take all the candidates combined, and he still beat every single candidate. Got over 50% of the vote. We can't dismiss that, and it would be foolish to ignore that. Across the river in New Jersey, this one actually hurts because Jack Ciattarelli, he fought hard. He ran a disciplined, smart, issue-based campaign. He talked about what matters to people, property taxes, energy costs, affordability, education, real issues that New Jersey families live with every day. He didn't play the partisan game. He focused on competence and solutions, and he did something rare in today's politics. He was able to win over 13 Democrat mayors to endorse his campaign. That's no small feat. He ran the kind of campaign Republicans should be running everywhere, and yet he lost to Mikey Sherrill, a weak, uninspiring candidate who had no real vision for the state. She was a terrible candidate. She'll be an even worse governor. And where it stings the most is not only did Ciattarelli lose, he lost badly by nearly 15 points. That's a stunning reversal from just a few years ago when he lost the governor's race by about 2 points. And if we look, Trump's election last year, Republicans made significant gains in a state where a Republican presidential candidate usually loses by double digits. Trump lost the state by less than 6 points. Not only that, but if we look at the polls leading up to Election Day, they showed the race was tightening. It was within the margin of error. So what happened? And that's where it gets frightening, and Republicans would be dumb to ignore it because the turnout numbers tell a story. Nearly 500,000 more voters showed up to the polls compared to 2021. That is massive. And if you're a Republican out there and you want to dismiss this as election fraud, then you're just going to keep losing elections. Okay, when you have 500,000 more voters show up to the polls compared to 2021, that's not based on fraud. It raises a lot of questions. Who were these new voters? What motivated them? How did Democrats mobilize so effectively and Republicans seem to be caught off guard? It's something that I'll dig deeper into because that kind of turnout, it doesn't happen by accident. But here is what is clear. New Jersey, the GOP did fight. They just got outmatched. Democrats didn't win because their message was better. They won because they built out this turnout machine that Republicans haven't been able to figure out. We moved to Virginia, a state that's practically unrecognizable from where it was 2 decades ago. Republicans didn't completely roll over here, but the effort was lackluster. They didn't really get behind Winsome Sears the way they should have. And you could feel it. The energy just wasn't the same. There were flashes of fight. There wasn't a sustained push, though. And Democrats, again, they were disciplined, organized. They were relentless. Abigail Spanberger cruised to victory. And the state has continued its slide deeper into blue territory despite Glenn Youngkin's 4 years in office. See, Virginia's transformation didn't happen overnight. It's been a slow drift that's fueled by one thing and one thing only, the growth of the federal government. Just think to yourself. Notice how Virginia going blue directly correlates with the expansion of the federal government. Virginia started turning blue right after the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. As government expanded by 2008, Virginia shifted, and the Democrat voting base shifted as well. It's no secret that most bureaucrats working in the federal government are Democrats. Just look at 2024, where 86% of all donations from federal workers went to the Kamala Harris campaign. The fact is that bureaucrats and most special interest groups are going to support and vote for the party that grows government, not the party that wants to cut it. And that's been the Democrats' bread and butter. Ironically, it's the Republicans' fault because Republicans helped build this bureaucracy. They thought expanding government power wouldn't change the political map, and yet it did. It's a monster that's now come back to bite them in the ass. See, Republicans should be talking about moving departments and agencies to other parts of the country, get him out of the D.C. power center. But the real shame of all the election races, the real shame was the Virginia Attorney General race. Now, normally this race would be irrelevant to me. I wouldn't cover it on this podcast. It's not a race that really has this massive national implication. But the reason that I have to talk about it is because Jay Jones, it's one of the most disgraceful stories of the election cycle. This is a man whose text messages were leaked showing him saying a political opponent should be assassinated and that person's children should be killed in front of their mother. That's not an exaggeration. Those are his words. And what happened? Nothing. Democrats shrugged it off. They didn't care one bit. Think about that for a second. What does it say about voters who could look at a man like that and still check the box next to his name? What does it say about the moral decay of a party that preaches tolerance, compassion, decency, and yet they turn a blind eye to that? If a Republican said those words, every news outlet in the country would still be talking about it. Every Republican would have come out and repudiated what that person said. But here, Democrats embraced him, regardless of what he said, because he's a Democrat. It's just another day at the office, and I can only hope that every single person who pulled the lever for that man did so with a deep sense of shame. What a disgrace. The sad part is they probably don't feel any shame. That's the sad part. But each of these races tells us something. First, New York showed us what happens when Republicans don't even bother to put up a fight. New Jersey showed us what happens when they do fight, but they're still out-organized and out-messaged. Virginia showed us how the bureaucratic expansion and demographics in Virginia have shifted so much that it's pretty much locked Virginia into Democrats' control. See, the pundits are going to say that this election was about affordability and economics. The voters are frustrated with the cost of living, housing, energy. And I agree. People are frustrated. I'm frustrated myself about those things. However, that's easy surface level analysis. But if it were true, if that was true, if this election was all about affordability and economics, Jack Ciattarelli would be the governor of New Jersey right now because he hit all the right notes: taxes, property taxes, regulation, energy costs. He laid out detailed plans showing exactly how he'd lower costs and make life more affordable for working families in New Jersey. Meanwhile, Mikey Sherrill's pitch was the same tired, top-down socialist nonsense. We're going to freeze energy prices. Freeze prices that are already sky high. How exactly does that help with affordability? Well, it doesn't. It's all economic theater. The truth is, Democrats didn't vote on affordability or logic. They voted on emotion. Democrat voters are emotionally invested in hating Republicans. That's what energizes them. They don't have to agree on policy or even understand it. All that matters is that they stop the Republicans. See, they've been conditioned to see Republicans as the enemy, and that emotional trigger overrides everything else. It doesn't matter. Facts, reason, logic, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. That's why you can have a candidate like Ciattarelli, who offered common sense solutions, lose by double digits to someone who had no plan at all, someone who's a moron. That's why a man like Jay Jones can win despite his vile, disgusting messages. And that's why Democrats continue to dominate these deep blue states, even as those states collapse under the weight of their own policies, even as the majority of people in those states are dissatisfied with the direction of their states or their cities. See, Democrat voters are driven by emotion, not results. Republicans, on the other hand, they keep trying to appeal to logic, numbers, reason, and it's not resonating. The GOP still thinks voters are driven by policy. Voters aren't. They're feeling. That's what they're driven by, their feelings. And until Republicans understand that, until they learn how to connect emotionally without sacrificing the substance they have, they're going to keep getting outplayed by a party that thrives on outrage and division. And I'm going to explain why these results should set off alarm bells for Republicans everywhere. Because if the GOP doesn't adapt, if they don't learn how to connect with the people on an emotional level, if they don't keep true to themselves and their principles, if they keep on telling voters that they're going to do one thing and then when they get in office do another, they're going to keep losing even when the policies are on their side. So everyone, hang tight. I'll explain it all when we get back from this quick break. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. So we just went through the election results, and if Republicans aren't alarmed by what they saw, they should be. These results weren't just about individual candidates. They weren't about isolated races. These results really revealed something much deeper, a structural, cultural problem within the Republican Party. See, the GOP is stuck fighting yesterday's war. They still believe that it's, 2000 or 2004. They believe that logic, policy, and reason are enough to win elections, but they're not. Not anymore. Things have changed. And all we have to do is start with the obvious, the enthusiasm gap. When Donald Trump is on the ballot, Republicans and independents show up in droves. The rallies, the energy, the enthusiasm, it's unmatched. There's no other candidate out there like that. You can actually feel it. And if you look, Mamdani's campaign, not the policies, but the actual campaign, it was similar in a way. You feel that energy. But the problem that Republicans have is when Trump isn't on the ballot, the energy just disappears. Republican turnout collapses. Voters who were fired up just 1 year ago, 2024, suddenly they sitting out of local races, governor's races. We're not going to get involved. We're complacent. And that's a serious problem because a movement cannot be built around one person. You can't rely on one name at the top to carry everyone else across the finish line on that ticket. And what happens is when that person isn't there, the whole structure falls apart. And we just saw it happen, but we didn't just see it happen in this election race. We saw it happen in 2022 as well. So Republicans have to figure out how to build a sustainable movement, one that inspires people even when Trump isn't running. And if they can't do that, they're going to keep losing state and local elections in these blue states that really they should be competitive in. Because I'm not ready to surrender New York City or New York State. I'm not ready to surrender New Jersey to Democrats. I'm not ready to surrender California. We should be winning these states. People are miserable in these states, but it's not just about turnout. See, Republicans, they don't win by acting like Democrats. They don't win by playing it safe or trying to blend in, and that happens far too often in these blue states. I gave a speech last week, and someone came up to me after the speech, and they said, well, you know, the only way Republicans can win in these states is if they run Democrats as Republicans, moderate Democrats as Republicans. That's a bunch of nonsense. They've been trying that for decades in New York, and it's failed. That policy has failed. They tried it in Chicago, and it's failed. They tried it in Los Angeles, and it's failed. That does not work. You win by presenting a clear alternative, by showing people that there's a brighter, freer, more prosperous future if we stop letting government run every aspect of our lives. And this goes right in line with the Mamdani victory speech, where government is anything and everything to everyone. And I'll play a clip of that and discuss it in the next segment. Republicans have to wake up. They have a big problem on their hands, and they don't have a clue what they're going up against. You know, take the No Kings rally from a few weeks ago. Millions of people across the country showed up on a Saturday. They took time out of their day on a Saturday, on a weekend day, to protest something that doesn't even exist. They're out there shouting about fascism and theocracy and about protecting democracy because Republicans are taking away democracy. They're destroying democracy. Meanwhile, the opposite is true. But Republicans, they just laughed it off. They said, you know, oh, it's just a bunch of old folks with nothing better to do. Now, there was a lot to make fun of at the No Kings rally, don't get me wrong. But that reaction shows how disconnected Republican leadership has become. The only one who seemed to get it was Ted Cruz. He warned about this. Understand, if millions of people take time at a weekend to show up at a political protest, even one as ridiculous as No Kings, that's not something you ignore. That's energy. That's organization. Those people are motivated. And when people are willing to spend their Saturday at a protest, I could assure you, they're definitely going to take the time to actually vote in an election, especially when it comes to older voters, because older voters are the most reliable demographic in politics. People will complain, oh, well, these were paid protesters. I always get that. They're paid protesters. Now, sure, some of them may be. We know that happens. But when you see crowds of this size, the overwhelming majority, those are genuine believers. They're emotionally invested. They're energized. And if you dismiss them as paid protesters, you're totally missing the point, and you're missing the threat that it actually poses. So Republicans, you can mock them online all you want. You call them paid protesters. You call them activists. But Democrats are registering them. They're organizing them. They're turning that energy into votes. And that's the difference. Democrats take emotion and they channel it into political activism. Republicans will sit there and roll their eyes and move on. It's similar to how Republicans ignored the leftist takeover of academia and the entire bureaucracy. And then when they realized what was going on, well, it was too late. Republicans need a reality check, and this one's going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people. Donald Trump is both the Republican Party's greatest asset, but he's also the greatest Democratic motivator that exists out there. He brings out enormous enthusiasm from Republicans and independents who love his fight. They love his authenticity, his willingness to take on the establishment. But what a lot of Republicans and independents don't see is he drives Democrats absolutely insane. And that hatred is what keeps the Democrats showing up. Think about this election. Democrats, they didn't have strong candidates. I mean, Mikey Sherrill, really? Jay Jones, really? Disgraceful. But millions of Democrat voters turned out. Why? Because for them, it wasn't about supporting those candidates. It was about stopping Republicans. They didn't vote for Democrats. They voted against the GOP because they despise Trump and everything and everyone that associates with him. You know, in Federalist 10, James Madison wrote that liberty is to faction what air is to fire. Without it, it instantly expires. Well, Trump is to Democrats' motivation what air is to fire. He keeps them burning every time they hear his name. Every time they express their Trump derangement syndrome, the TDS, the political energy, it just ignites. It's instinctive. They've been conditioned to respond with outrage, and outrage turns into votes. So Republicans need to understand this dynamic. It's not enough to rely on Trump's popularity, especially when people don't show up to the polls if he's not on the ballot. They need a plan to neutralize the left's obsession with him, because it is an obsession. Trump derangement syndrome is real. And that obsession fuels the turnout machine. That brings me to the biggest problem of all, that Republicans are just so blind they don't see it. They don't know how to connect emotionally. See, Democrats sell their agenda through feelings. It's all about feelings. It's about instilling fear, talking about compassion. They express outrage. They make people feel guilty. Republicans, they try and sell their policies with charts, statistics, and logic. That doesn't work anymore. Democrats talk about justice and rights and fairness. Republicans are sitting there talking about regulation reform, budget responsibility. So which one do you think is going to resonate more? See, Republicans need to make freedom emotional again. They need to talk about liberty not as an abstract theoretical principle. They need to talk about it as something that affects everyone's lives, the families, your kids, your futures. Take the whole government shutdown. Democrats are framing it as if Republicans want to take stuff away from you. They want to make your life more difficult. And as Democrats in their media apparatus make Republicans look heartless, what are Republicans doing? What are they saying out there? They're saying that a clean continuing resolution is something that's always been supported by both political parties. Now, they're not wrong. That's true. But at the same time, they don't understand that most people have no idea what the hell a continuing resolution is. You have Democrats out saying, well, Republicans are in the majority. They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Republicans instinctively think that Americans actually know how the Senate works. They don't realize that the overwhelming majority of Americans have no idea that you need a supermajority in the Senate. You need 60 votes to get things done. And so Republicans have to rely on 7, but actually 8 Democrats to come over to support the continuing resolution to reopen the government. That the minority party in the Senate actually has a lot of power to stop legislation. But Republicans think Americans already know that. So Democrats are out there pounding this message that the Republicans are in the majority, and Republicans don't realize that Americans will buy into that argument. And when I say make freedom and liberty emotional again, I'm talking about how Republicans need to explain that government dependency is nothing more than slavery. You're a slave to the state. That real freedom is being able to have the opportunity to succeed. That real freedom is about self-reliance. Don't just talk about cutting taxes. Talk about that the ordinary American, the men and women who wake up every single morning, that go out there, they work hard for their money. They deserve to keep their money. They deserve to keep what they earn so that they could build their future, not fund a corrupt bureaucracy that can constantly waste money and abuses its power. Don't sit there and just say, reduce regulation. You need to explain to people that they should have the freedom to start a business. They should have the freedom to buy a home, to pursue your dreams without government red tape holding you back. That the government is the one that's creating the problems. Why are you empowering them even further as if they could solve it? Don't push the idea of 50-year mortgages. And now Trump said that over the weekend. It's a terrible idea. You shouldn't be a slave to the government, and you shouldn't be a slave to debt. You need to make the conservative message hit people where it counts, in the heart, not just the head. See, Republicans, they need to start getting in the emotional track like the Democrats do. And they need to stop downplaying what we're up against. They need to start fighting as if they mean it. They have to rebuild the local infrastructure. And I'm talking about year-round voter registration, precinct captains, outreach to independents and working-class voters. See, the Democrats never stop organizing. They do it 365 days a year. Republicans, after every election, they stop. And they're always playing catch-up. The GOP has to channel passion, not just policy. Because when you combine truth with conviction, it is powerful. Look at all the areas we're talking about. Go into New York City, and you're going to be hard-pressed to find a single person that believes it's headed in the right direction. You go to places of New York City, Chicago, just about any other major urban center. They've been under Democrat rule for decades. And if we look at Chicago, it's a century. You can't blame Republicans for the decline of these cities. People are miserable. And you would think that after decades of failed Democrat rule, that these urban centers would be ripe for the pickings. But you have Republicans who are just morons. They're absent. And some push back against me. They say, well, the voters have been conditioned in these areas to always vote Democratic. And there's no point in wasting time, money, and resources in places we can't win. That is a loser mentality. Stop being a loser. The fact is that if you ignore these areas, if you refuse to go into them, if you refuse to listen and talk to the people in these communities, you're not going to win anyone over. However, if you go into these areas, you're not going to change them overnight. But if you start to peel 5 to 10% off each election cycle, ultimately you will win. See, Republicans have to remind people that conservatism isn't about protecting the rich or cutting government to hurt people for the sake of cutting government. It's about empowering people. It's about restoring freedom. It's about implementing real fairness, giving people real opportunities, not the BS socialism that the Democrats are pushing. You need to win over hearts, not just arguments. And Republicans, they have a lot of problems that they have to fix. Now, with that being said, Democrats shouldn't start celebrating too much. Be careful what you wish for, because while they may have won this round, their party's rotting away from within. The progressives have taken over. They're the ones that's setting the agenda, and the so-called moderates are being boxed out, bullied into silence. Look at how they're trying to kick Senator John Fetterman out of the party. So Democrats today, they're patting themselves on the back. They take the winds at their back. They better be careful, because the radicals now own their party, and the consequences will come sooner or later. You just got to hope it's not too late. So when we get back, I'm going to explain how figures like Zohran Mamdani represent not just a local shift, but a national one, how the Democratic Party is becoming the very thing that you have been warned about for years. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Now, if you're enjoying the episode, you find the content informative, it really helps more people discover the podcast. So please share it with others, share it with your friends, your family, share it on social media. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to write a good review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now, I want to start off this segment by playing a clip of Mamdani's victory speech, because I think it perfectly captures where the Democratic Party is headed.
We will prove that there is no problem too large for government to solve and no concern too small for it to care about.
Now, that line says it all. It's the mantra of socialism that ultimately morphs into communism, the belief that government is the answer to everything, that individual responsibility doesn't matter, that while they say the power is with the people, the truth is the power belongs to the bureaucrats and politicians, and they're going to run every aspect of your life. See, Mamdani's platform reads like the communist wish list, right? Government-controlled housing, free public transportation, universal everything, including daycare, cutting police budgets, closing down prisons, redistributing wealth from those who produce to those who don't. This isn't a fringe view in the Democratic Party anymore. This is now the Democratic mainstream. And the party of JFK and Truman is gone. The party of Bill Clinton, it's dead. The moderates have been boxed out. The AOCs, Bernie Sanders, the Mamdanis of the world are the ones that now run the show. So in every practical sense, the Democratic Party is dead. It's now the Democratic Socialist Party of America. And I want to make it clear that democratic socialism is a lie. It's a myth. It doesn't really exist. You know, they constantly point to the Scandinavian nations, the Nordic nations. They say that that's the model they want to follow. But understand, those are capitalist countries. They are no socialist countries. They rank higher on the capitalist scale than the heavily regulated United States. We have a shared economy. So I want you to show me. Show me where these countries push cutting funding for police, where these countries push for closing prisons. Show me where they offer free public transportation. Show me where they want to take control of the housing inventory like Mamdani wants to do. Threaten private property. And that's what Democrats are starting to do. They constantly point to the Nordic and Scandinavian nations, but what they're really pushing is Venezuela. What they're pushing is Cuba. New York City is going to face similar results that Venezuela and Cuba face. We are going to witness the slow motion destruction of one of the greatest cities on earth, the financial capital of the world. And under this new ideology, everything becomes a government problem, and every government failure becomes an excuse for more government to increase its power from the problems that it created in the first place. If they didn't get involved, half the problems wouldn't even exist. And what's going to happen? You're going to see businesses leave. You're going to see wealth flee the state. Tax bases are going to shrink. Crime's going to increase. Public safety will deteriorate. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure this out. We have decades of data that shows this. And once again, who's the ones that are going to get screwed? The middle class, the people who actually keep the city running. They're going to be the ones that get crushed. See, the rich will be fine. The wealthy donors and ideologues who support the socialist experiment, they're going to stay rich. The ones who oppose it, they're just going to leave. They're going to pack up. They'll move to either Long Island, or they'll get out completely out of state and go to places like Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas. The poor, their lives aren't going to change. They're not going to get better, that's for sure. They're still going to struggle to make ends meet. The streets will get worse. The opportunities will be fewer. Services will become less reliable. But it's the middle class, the people who can't afford to leave, the people who don't have the luxury of tax loopholes or second homes. They're the ones who are going to get squeezed. They're going to pay even more and get less. They're going to watch their neighborhoods decline. That's the reality of socialism and communism. It doesn't lift people up. It drags everyone down except those at the top. And Republicans who believe the socialist utopia will collapse quickly, that the collapse is going to wake all these people in New York City up, they show how short-sighted they are. Again, if you're not in those communities, if you're not talking to the people are not going to see the failures right in front of their face. And it's a dangerous and naive way to think. History doesn't back up that there's going to be a swift collapse. The Soviet Union lasted for decades before the cracks started showing. Cuba is still standing. Venezuela has been in free fall for years, but the regime is still in power. Socialist systems, they don't collapse overnight. They have a habit of propping themselves up through control. And they keep people dependent on the system, and that dependency is going to delay their collapse. So while the cracks will eventually show, it could take a long time. Don't think that within a year, New York City's gone. And when the collapse does come, you could be absolutely sure that Democrats will never take responsibility for its collapse. They're going to blame Republican obstruction, even though Republicans had literally zero power in New York City. They'll blame Republicans for the failures of New York City. They're going to blame the rich who leave the state. They're going to claim it's greed, and that's why they're failing. They'll blame everyone except the architects of the socialist disaster they created. In the short term, I do believe it's going to help Stefanik in a governor's race against Hochul. But again, there's a lot of time between now and the 2026 elections, so it's hard to tell how it plays out. But let's face it, Democrats are going to blame Republicans who have zero power in the state, and the voters are going to be dumb enough to believe it, especially considering that Republicans just simply ignore the voters. Mark my words. When the tax revenues dry up, services start failing, the left's going to say, oh, it's the Republicans. It's because the rich left. It's because Republicans refuse to support gun control. That's why we're seeing an increase in violence. They're going to point fingers at everyone but themselves. And the people who suffer most, the working families, the small business owners, the teachers, the cops, the nurses, they're going to be the ones paying the price for this ideological madness. The sad part is a lot of those people will be guilty for voting that into office. That's the tragedy of socialism. The poor stay poor, rich stay rich, middle class, you're getting screwed. You're going to get hollowed out, and you'll become dependent on the government just as well. This isn't just about New York City. It's a warning for the entire country. Everyone should pay attention to what's going on, because what happens in New York never stays in New York. It's a testing ground for national policy, and just wait till you have all the Democratic candidates of 2028 lining up, the presidential candidates going more extreme than even Mamdani probably. Every radical idea is going to spread. And if Mamdani's policies succeed in being normalized, I don't mean succeed, you're going to see similar experiments popping up in other Democrat strongholds, Chicago, San Fran, Los Angeles. Eventually, the ideas will go mainstream at the federal level as well. That's the real danger. It's not that New York's going to collapse tomorrow. It's that America is gradually going to absorb the same failed ideology, the same mentality under the false promise of compassion, and people are dumb enough to buy into it. So Republicans can't afford to just sit back and wait for the other side to self-destruct. They have to be proactive. They can't be reactive. They need to show people that there is an alternative way, a better way. And Republicans, if they wait for socialism to fail, the damage may already be irreversible. It's not enough to just criticize socialism. The criticisms have been out there for decades. Republicans have to offer something better. They have to offer a vision that's rooted in freedom, opportunity, responsibility, values that actually uplift people instead of trapping them into this government dependency. And the only way you defeat this ideology is to outthink it. You have to be willing to put in the hard work it takes. You have to out-inspire it. Mamdani saying that no problem is too big for the government to solve and no issue is too small for the government to take up. That's not vision. That's tyranny disguised as compassion. And when the government controls every aspect of life, have you ever heard someone that walked out of any type of dealings with government saying that was a pleasant experience? Like you go to DMV. Does anyone look happy in DMV? No, everyone looks miserable. Anytime you have to deal with government, it's a miserable experience. Now imagine you have to do a DMV style thing for your housing, for your daycare, for your education. It's a friggin' disaster. When government tries to be everything, it eventually becomes the enemy of freedom. And that's what it is. If we don't start pushing back now, if we don't start pushing back with conviction and clarity, the America we know won't just fade. It's already becoming unrecognizable. We've already deviated far from the vision of the Founding Fathers. And when we talk about conservatism, we're trying to conserve the principles of self-government, self-reliance, personal responsibility, liberty. That's what we want to preserve. See, voters get the government they deserve. And the question now is, what will voters do next? Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, make sure to give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating. Take 30 seconds to write a good review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and share this episode with others out there. We have to broaden the audience because we need more people to understand what's really at stake. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.